You're listening to episode 45 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On today's show, food trends and a new recipe for 2019. On the show, I'm going to tell you what's in store for LHT listeners and readers in 2019. I'm going to talk about hot new food trends with fellow dietitian and soon-to-be podcaster Joan Salge Blake. And I'm going to also share a brand new recipe for cod, carrot, and green bean foil packets with lime avocado sauce. And if you don't love cod, you can use any other favorite seafood. So where should we begin? Well, let's begin with Happy New Year. I hope you guys had a great holiday season. I am personally not a big fan of resolutions, but this year I did decide to show more gratitude to the people who I interact with every day. And, this could be you guys. It can be my family, my friends, the person serving me coffee at Starbucks, although I usually make my own coffee in the morning. Just showing gratitude has been shown to boost happiness. And of course, happiness makes us healthier. So it's an exercise that I'm just trying to practice every day. And, I always have the commitment to exercise more. Never stick with that one. It's kind of something I struggle with. But I do think I'm maybe a little too hard on myself because I walk when it's not so frigid cold outside like it is today here in New England. And I like to do yoga. And we do have this little exercise room in the basement. And for whatever reason, I come up with every excuse in the book not to walk down that extra flight of stairs, to walk into the weight room. And I really know I should do it, even if it's like 20 minutes a day. So, I think I'm going to go for little tweaks this year rather than like one big commitment or one big resolution. Head on over to the show notes from today's show if you have a resolution or a commitment for 2019 that you want to share. Okay, so Joan Salge Blake, dietitian, she's going to be on the show today to talk about food trends, things like the keto diet. What is it? Is it worth trying? She's going to talk about cutting back on sugar in the diet, how to do it, what's driving it, kind of that trend, what's driving that trend. We're going to talk about foil pack dinners. So this is a trend that the New York Times actually just wrote about. And if you've ever gone camping, I'm sure that you have cooked over an open fire. And if you've done that, you've probably used aluminum foil. I'm thinking about, potatoes or something like that, or even your backyard grill. Cooking in foil is such a big trend this year. And I think it may have sprung out of the whole sheet pan dinners trend, which of course is this like no muss, no fuss, everything on the sheet pan, everything cooks at once. This is kind of taking it to a new level. You use the sheet pan, but on top of it is the aluminum foil that you've filled with whatever you're making for dinner, whatever that protein might be, or the veggies and the seasoning. You just seal it up and you bake it, and everything just kind of steams inside. So I've got this new recipe that I'm going to tell you about for cod, carrot, and green bean foil packets with a lime avocado sauce. So you don't have to take out pen and paper when I tell you about this recipe because I did post it to the blog and it's really, really easy. I have a similar recipe on the blog, which I make with salmon and teriyaki sauce and snow peas and carrots. It's a little bit similar, but I realize not everybody loves salmon. I actually love salmon. Salmon's my favorite fish, but not everybody loves it. And especially for kids who might be a little hesitant to eat fish, I always recommend a mild white fish. So something like cod or even tilapia or haddock or even catfish, a mild white fish, very simple to prepare. It's a good sort of gateway to get your kids to eat more seafood. And so this is a recipe that I make with cod. But here's how you make it. Okay, so you want to take big pieces of tin foil, maybe measuring like 17 inches across. So you've got these 4 big pieces of aluminum foil, and you just lay them on the counter, and that's like kind of your work surface. And then to each packet, right in the middle, you want to add baby carrots. So you're going to need 1.5 cups of baby carrots. But sometimes, when you buy the baby carrots, they're kind of fat, and they're not going to cook up in the few minutes it's going to take to cook your fish. So you want to slice them lengthwise in half or even into quarters. So you've got these kind of matchsticks, if you will. So now you kind of lay those evenly over the 4 pieces of aluminum foil. This is if it serves 4. And then I like to use green beans, but I like to use those French green beans. Those are the really skinny ones. And they're just, I think, kid-friendly. They're just a little less intimidating than a big green bean. So you've got these little skinny green beans, and you just trim the ends, and then you place those evenly on top of the carrots. And you'll probably end up with about a dozen green beans per packet. And then you take 2 green onions. You trim the ends, and then you thinly slice. And then reserve about half of the green onions. You'll use those later, maybe for a topping or something, a little garnish on top. But just divide those up and then slice them. And then half of them you're just going to distribute on top of the green beans. So next up, you want 4 cod fillets, and they're going to be about 5 ounces each. Before you put the cod on top, what I want you to do is put about a tablespoon of teriyaki sauce, but I'm going to tell you about this other kind of teriyaki I like, about half a tablespoon. You're going to use half a tablespoon on each packet. So half a tablespoon on each of those veggie piles. And the sauce I like to use, it's called soyaki, Soyaki. I get it at Trader Joe's, or maybe you've seen soyve at the supermarket. It's kind of like a teriyaki with sesame seeds in it. And if you can't find soyaki, if you don't have a Trader Joe's nearby, I just love the flavor. Just use teriyaki and add a sprinkling of sesame seeds. But you'll need 4 tablespoons total, but half a tablespoon gets drizzled over each of the veggie mounds. Then the cod goes on top, and you'll season with a little salt and pepper, and then the remaining soyaki. Then what you want to do is you want to fold up the packets. And so I just take the long ends, and I kind of, it could be the shorter ends. It doesn't matter. You just kind of want to bring 2 ends together and then kind of roll them down, and then take the other 2 ends and kind of seal those. So you end up with these little pouches or packets. And again, if you've ever been camping or you like to cook on the backyard grill, you've probably done this before. And, in French cooking, a lot of times you'll see people using parchment for this. I think that the aluminum foil is much easier. So then you want to put the 4 pouches on a baking sheet and then pop those into an oven. I like to heat the oven to 425, and then it'll take anywhere between 15 to 18 minutes for your fish to cook and your veggies to soften. And then you'll remove everything from the oven and then just carefully open up those packets. There's going to be a lot of steam that comes out, but super delish. And then you can garnish with some cilantro. You can garnish with those extra green onions. You can add more sesame seeds. So dinner is done. But if you want to make a special sauce for this recipe, I do have on the blog an avocado sauce. Very simple. I like to use a little mini food processor. And then you just add a ripe avocado that you peel and pit. And I, maybe cut it into quarters. A few tablespoons of cilantro leaves. I usually start with about a 1/3 cup, but I reserve half for the garnish at the end. So let's say like 3 tablespoons of cilantro leaves. If you don't like cilantro, just leave it out or add parsley. Or maybe you can add a little mint or a little basil. And then 2 tablespoons of plain Greek yogurt, 1 lime, and I zest it. So you add the zest, and then I juice it. So you end up with about 2 tablespoons of lime juice. I add a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt and 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper, and I just blend it all up in my little mini food processor, and that is the sauce that goes on top. So that's your brand new recipe for the new year. And I will tell you that on the blog, in addition to this recipe, I did a second blog post where I featured a dozen other recipes that are all made in foil packets, although the caveat is a few I think are made in parchment. But I gathered these recipes from some other bloggers, and so you've got a bunch more seafood packet recipes and a couple of chicken recipes. So head on over to Liz's Healthy Table, to the show notes, and then I'm going to link out to the recipe roundup and to this recipe. But they're on the blog, so you can go to the blog as well. So what's happening in 2019? All right, I have a couple of really cool ideas I want to bounce off of you. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a survey, and I'm going to send it out to everybody who subscribes to my newsletter, but I'll tell you guys about it on the Podcast Posse. That's my closed group on Facebook, and I'll tell you about it in an upcoming podcast. But the survey is going to serve as a way for me to really hear from you. So we're going to talk about the subjects and the guests that you want to hear on this podcast. I'll ask you about questions you might have about food and nutrition. What are your biggest concerns? What are your biggest challenges? We're going to get to know each other a little bit more through the survey, and that way I can craft future podcasts that you guys are really interested in. So that's one thing I'm doing. The other thing I really want to do in March, and I want you to hold me to this, is I want to create a month-long celebration, which I'm calling March into Good Nutrition. And every day I'm going to answer one of your questions. And I'm going to answer it on Facebook. I'll shoot a little video, Twitter, and Instagram. So I'll use social media to communicate all these questions and all of these answers. And every day I'll tackle a new topic. And it might even be, hey, I'm curious about knife skills, or what's your favorite salad dressing? Like anything like that. I'm going to definitely deliver on that in March. I'm going to create a bunch of freebies and, of course, new recipes in the new year. And then hear me out on this one. I really want to do a podcast where I feature a one-on-one kind of live counseling session with one of you. So I'm going to put this out on the Podcast Posse, and I'm going to find out who's out there who's really struggling to feed their family a healthy diet. One kid might be picky. Maybe another child's a vegetarian, but everybody else eats meat and seafood and chicken. Or maybe you're working 2 jobs. You can't juggle it all. Or maybe you're just so confused about nutrition you want to pull your hair out. So I want to do this one-on-one. That's what I'm thinking. And that'll be a special podcast with one of you, but everybody else will really learn from it. So I've got lots of exciting things coming up in 2019. Liz's Healthy Table. It's brought to you by my friends at superhealthykids.com, your one-stop shop for recipes, meal plans, cooking videos, and tips for feeding kids of all ages. My show is also brought to you by the Parents on Demand Network. This is an app that's filled with parenting podcasts, including shows like Pure Nurture, The Nourished Child, Pediacast, and my podcast, Liz's Healthy Table. You can find Parents on Demand in the App Store or online at parentsondemand.com. Joan, welcome to the podcast.
So glad to be here.
So you and I go way back, but for people like way back, I honestly don't even know when I first met you. That's how way back it was.
Right. I think we could barely walk, maybe. I don't know.
We were not babies. We were not toddlers together, but it's been a while. And I was just hoping you could tell my listeners a little bit about yourself. You're a mom, you're a glamour-to-be, you're a media pro. So just kind of give us a little glimpse behind the Joan curtain.
Right. Well, I don't know where you got the glamour to be. Did you hear something that I don't know?
I thought for some reason you told me that one of your kids was having a baby or their wife. No?
You know something I don't know.
Oh, my gosh. I literally started a rumor. Maybe you had a child who was going to get married and you said you're excited to be a glamour one day. Maybe that's what it was.
That's it. He just got married to a lovely woman, Megan, and basically when they got engaged, I was talking to her father, and I said, John, the father, you know me, I call it like I see it, and trust me, we get rid of him before we get rid of her.
So that's son number one.
That's son number one, and son number two is having fun in New York designing men's clothes. So there you go.
Very cool. Yeah, and you're a dietitian, you work at BU, so give us a little detail here.
Right. Well, first of all, the most important thing about my background is I'm Italian. So I grew up with that kind of a family you can only imagine. And I talk with my hands and I love to eat. I love good food. I became a registered dietitian because I loved good food a little too much and had to put myself on a diet to lose a little bit of weight, which I did. And I fell in love with the whole subject of nutrition based upon that challenge of trying to lose a few extra pounds that we're getting on the body here. And we all know how challenging that can be to lose weight. And when I did it, I was proud as a little peacock. And I decided, you know something, this is what I want to help people do, have them eat better so they feel better about themselves. So I went back to college and I did all the nutrition courses, went to graduate school and became a registered dietitian. And now I have a doctorate. And so there you go. And I write, as you might mentioned, and I write textbooks. I write for the Boston Globe and U.S. News and World Report. And I do a lot of media on the topic of nutrition. So, I took a personal experience and I parlayed that into a career.
All right. And you are a professor at BU, which is where I got my master's degree. So it is my alma mater.
There we go. And so you're a terrier. Go terrier.
There you go. And I grew up with a Boston Terrier, so it was meant to be. So food trends. So that's really the topic of today's show. And I'm always amazed at how trends change so much over a given year. And here we are in 2019, which I really can't believe because I can remember Y2K like it was just yesterday. Remember Armageddon, the world was going to end. We all had our bottled water. And so I'm looking at this piece you did for U.S. News and World Report. And I thought it was really interesting because in the lead of the piece, you talk about the keto diet as being this like hot diet for 2019. And then I see my friend Wendy has bought this book. It's a vegan keto diet / cookbook. And I'm like, wow, keto has really taken force. So can you just tell listeners a little bit about the keto diet? Like, what is it? And then we could talk a little bit about maybe, why it's such a hot trend and, is it really worth checking out or moving on from? But what is that keto diet all about?
So the keto diet is a diet that is very low in carbohydrate, moderate protein, and very, very high in fat. But we're back to, low carbohydrate again. What's happening over the years, carbohydrate has become the villain on the plate. Diets like this are like fashion. What is old is new, and so you can only wind back to the 1970s. And the diet of choice was, of course, the Atkins diet. And the Atkins diet was a very low carbohydrate diet. And, ironically, in the 70s, the bell-bottom pants, talking about fashion, were in style and they're back. So everything, comes back, if you hold on to it long enough. So really, it's carbs are the thing that now people are reducing in their diet. What makes this a little different than keto is that it's very, very high in fat, and the carbohydrates are very, very low, where it's really challenging to follow. The keto diet does have some science credibility for children who have epilepsy. So they have known that people who follow this diet, little kids that follow this diet, may help reduce the amount of seizures. So there could be something going on there for this unique population. But, you talk to anybody who has a child that has this and has to follow this type of a diet, and they'll say, this is really challenging to follow. And the question is, where is the science that a low carb diet like this and a high fat diet really is going to help you to lose weight? And there really isn't any science behind that. Yes, it'll be more likely if you do lose weight that it's just you're cutting calories. That's what you're doing because you're cutting out so many carbohydrates. You're cutting out so many foods that I don't know what you're eating here. So there's really not good science. And we know that a carbohydrate-rich diet of healthy carbohydrates, such like the Mediterranean diet, which once again wins the Oscar for the healthiest diet again in 2019, it won it last year in 2018, and it is still one that is waist-friendly and good for you overall. So there really isn't a lot of science about this keto diet, which is challenging to follow. And if you really start to follow it, you may feel nauseous and really kind of, foggy and just not healthy or just not fun to be around. So the question is, why are people following this when the science is not really there to suggest that's going to help with weight loss better than any other reducing calorie diet before?
So basically, buyer beware. You can try it, but it's going to be tough and it may or may not work. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from you.
And also when you're cutting out so many carbohydrate-rich food, we're cutting out the whole dairy group. We're reducing vegetables group. No whole grains. The fruit is going to go down. The fiber is going to be low. You just can't. This is not sustainable, nor it would be healthy. How could you be cutting out all these food groups and still think that you're going to meet all your nutrient needs?
It's interesting because Amber, who's one of my listeners on the podcast Posse, which is my closed Facebook group, and anybody can join, including you, Joan. But Amber said, I had sort of thrown it out there that I was going to have you on the show. We're going to talk about diet and food trends. And she mentioned the Mediterranean diet, which is like the diet she follows. It's actually the diet I personally follow. I talk about it a lot on the show. And you do get like medley of beautiful foods, vegetables, legumes, fish, and so much variety. So I think that's something to keep in mind, no matter what year it is, 2019, it doesn't matter. It's just one of these sustainable diets that you could stick with. It's healthy, it tastes good, and you can watch your calories on that kind of a diet.
You know what I think? Why don't we make a pact here that is 2019, how about in 2029? You have me back on the show and we're going to say, I'll bet a week's paycheck, which of course is not a lot of money, that the Mediterranean diet is still number one.
Okay. If I am still podcasting 10 years from now, Joan, we will totally do that. And so thank you. Thank you for that. Now, did I ask you at the top of the show, speaking of podcasts, or was it before we started the interview? Because now my brain is like, I don't know where it is. Did you mention your new podcast to my listeners?
Thank you so much for letting me talk about it. My new podcast is about to be launched. It'll be launched in about the next 2 weeks, hopefully the end of January. It's called Spot On. And it's a health and wellness podcast for college students, those that are going to be college students, or anyone who knows a college student. So it's a pretty broad audience there.
So it's really going to be looking at the hot trends and then dispelling nutrition myths and clearing up confusion about nutrition.
Right. And also making life a little bit easier for college students. One of them is going to be, should you be meditating your way through college and beyond?
Yes.
How do you get along with your roommates?
Okay.
What to eat before and after you work out. So it's going to be really things that are usable, doable. And, I just did one on this whole paleo and keto diet, trendy things that are happening in our space.
Okay, good stuff. Let me know when the show launches and I'll tell everybody in my world all about it. And if they have college kids or they're just curious about contemporary nutrition topics, they'll tune in. So thanks for that. So back to nutrition trends then. Another big trend that I think we're going to see in 2019 and something you talked about in your story is sugar. And This emphasis is pushed to lower sugar. And so do you think food companies, because you know how they're always trying to lower the bad fat and lower the sodium, but do you think lowering sugar, added sugar, is going to be the next big thing?
Well, I think what's going to happen, yes, because as soon as the added sugars get onto the nutrition fact panel, and some nutrition fact panel already have it, but they have until January 2020, all food products have got to convert over to the nutrition fact panel, which will include added sugar. So the consumer will be able to see when they're comparing products, just say, for example, orange juice versus orange drink. And we know that orange juice, 100% orange juice, will have no added sugar, and that an orange drink more likely will have 100% added sugar to it. And so people will say, gee, they look the same color, they give the same amount of vitamin C because the drink has been fortified with the vitamin C, but wow, the amount of added sugar in the drink is unbelievable, and there's none in the orange juice. So people are going to be able to do comparison shopping when it comes to sugar, and they want that. The sugar has been in the media for years now. We have science-based that we have to bring the sugar down in our diet. So the public is very much hear about this and looking to get the sugar down in their diet. So they're looking for sweets options that are healthier for you. And so the problem with this is, well, you are, extraordinary in the kitchen, and you've made recipes and try to make recipes more healthy. And you know what happens when you take grandma's oatmeal cookies and you take all the sugar out of grandma's oatmeal cookies and then bake them, you end up with grandma's hockey pucks, because we know that sugar has a job in baking, tenderizing products and giving flavor. So beyond just the sweetness it adds, there are also things that it does in products, baked goods and things to make it palatable on many levels. So you just can't reduce the sugar in all products, otherwise they wouldn't be tasty or chewable or edible. So it's going to be interesting to see that we can get, products that we'll be reducing. We already have yogurts that are doing this, reducing the amount of added sugar that's in them. So we'll see what's going to be happening as far as the whole product line changing.
Right. And I would say that when you're baking at home, if you have a recipe, let's say it's a loaf cake or something, or a muffin recipe, and it calls for 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, you can reduce it to 1.25 cups and see what happens. So you could start to, slow things down, reduce things, slowly and, see where it's at. But I remember actually years ago, my kids, I don't know which son it was going off to some kind of like baseball practice or something. And maybe it was a soccer tournament. And I decided to make banana chocolate chip muffins. It's a recipe on my website. It's a classic from The Mom's Guide to Meal Makeovers, which is my first cookbook. And I must have been coming down with the flu or something. I felt lousy. I really didn't have it together, but I was like in the kitchen baking and I left out all of the sugar. And I cooked these things. They were awful. They were like these little hockey puck things, no flavor at all. So lesson learned, you can't just keep all the sugar out. Yeah, so reduce it slowly and comparison shop, like you said. And I love that example of the orange juice versus the orange drink, which leads me to my next food trend, which is these milk alternatives. So soy milk, almond milk, all these different nut milks. We're now seeing oat milk, which I actually really like. Why do you think we're just seeing this huge trend in these non-dairy milks? And should people be gravitating to them? When you start to see these at the supermarket, you kind of think, oh, maybe I should be drinking that instead of cow's milk. So where do these non-dairy milks kind of fit into the whole scene in 2019?
Well, this is so wild. If you and I, you talked at the beginning how we go way back. We go back to the SnackWell era. And if somebody would have said to you, gee, you're going to enjoy these SnackWells in the future with oat milk, you would say, what?
Exactly.
Or
peanut milk or, yeah.
How do you milk an oat? Where's the cow go? Cow's going nowhere. So this is really, really interesting. And, it started with soy milk decades ago. And soy milk was, alternative to people who wanted to be vegans and needed, something to put on their cereal in the morning. They didn't want to use dairy foods because they wanted to be animal free. So soy milk has been around forever, and it was popular among people who wanted to become vegetarians, but it really wasn't, like mainstream where there was a gazillion brands of it. Now, when you go in the milk aisle, it's like soy is all over the place. And as you said, oat milk and almond milk. And these are all, dairy alternatives. And I think that people are trying to do some more plant-based type additions to their diet, and they're looking to maybe add more flavor to your diet. I know people that do almond milk, they will do, a regular milk in their coffee, but they'll do almond milk, say, in their oatmeal because they like the flavor of it. So it's like this new way to cook and bake and eat different flavored drinks, milks that they're calling them, beyond cow milk. And the issue of this, and, again, like if you're a vegan, you need to get some substitute. You just got to make sure that when you have these, to just watch the added sugar in them. But more importantly, if you're going to eliminate, say, milk from your diet, milk is a really, really, jam-packed with great nutrition. It's been jam-packed with potassium, vitamin D, and calcium, which are 3 full short nutrients. And when I say that means that most Americans are falling short of them in their diet. So if you're going to eliminate milk, man, you got to make sure that you are substituting with something that's going to be rich in those nutrients, in addition to, something that it's enjoyable to you and healthy. So it's very, very interesting to see the explosion of these plant-based milks and what comes of it.
Yeah, and I think, too, the protein. You're not always going to get as much protein if you go with, like, the almond milk, for example. So, yeah, I think there's a place for them. And some people just can't tolerate dairy, so it gives them so many alternatives. And I must say, I've not even tried them all. I don't think I've tried the hemp milk or the cashew milk. So I need to expand my horizons and just give them a try. But I love nothing more than milk in my coffee in the morning, and I'm not ready to give that up. That's my morning indulgence, right? I've just got to have my coffee.
I couldn't even put my socks on if I don't have my coffee with my frothed milk. You know what I mean? I have one of those little frothers.
Oh, yes. I do the same thing. I love the frother.
Just this is the only way I could start the day. We were home this weekend, and my husband gets up before me, and he just had a little too much cereal, and I had like a quarter of a cup of milk in my coffee. That was it. I'm like, what? How could you have done this? How could you not left me so little milk?
My husband has done that to me too, where there's so little milk left. He's got to have his cereal because he is like, you didn't hear this from me, but he's kind of OCD. Like, he's got to start the day with his cereal, with his milk. And, it's the worst when there's just like a teeny bit of milk. And he's like, well, why don't you drink black coffee? I said, because I don't like black coffee. Maybe you like black coffee, but I don't like black coffee. Oh, it's a bad day when that happens.
It's a bad day and you haven't even gotten dressed yet.
You haven't even put your socks on yet, for heaven's sake. So let's move on to another hot trend, which actually the New York Times talked about, which is foil pack dinners. And that is you cook your food in foil, just like over a campfire, and I think the whole sheet pan dinner was really popular for a while. No muss, no fuss. Now we're taking it to a new level where you have a big piece of aluminum foil. You put your food in the center. I talked about it at the top of the show before Joan came on about this new recipe on my blog for cod and green beans and carrots and this little Asian sauce. And you just wrap it all up in foil and bake it on a baking sheet. And it's so easy. So New York Times talked about the trend. Joan, you talked about it in your piece. But why do you think foil pack dinners are like this huge trend? And can it help people get healthier meals on the table?
Right. All the above. So what I love about this is that you could take food, especially foods that some people don't have a lot of history of cooking. Let's say a fish, a very lean fish. And, you could easily overcook fish, a flounder or something. And then, you overcook it to the point where it's inedible. So what I love about the foil is that you can take healthy foods or any kind of foods, and by making it in this enclosed capsule, it steams it. It's the flavor. It keeps it moist and less opportunity to dry out. But the biggest thing I love is put it on the plate and roll up that foil and recycle it. I mean, to me, it's better than going out to dinner. Like, my kitchen stays clean. I get a great healthy meal at cheaper prices, and I don't have to do any dishes. So I love this. I absolutely love this. And I just want to throw it out there. If anybody runs out of heavy-duty aluminum foil, just call me, because I have 18,000 rolls in my house. And that this way, I used to have a lot of toilet paper. No, I have more foil now than toilet paper, because I think this is fabulous. And we did this on grills a lot of years ago. And so I think it's going to explode. And I think that people that are busy are going to find out they can get dinners on the table quickly, less cleanup, throwing things in the oven. And most importantly, and a subject that is very dear to my heart is food waste.
Me too.
And I love the fact that we can reduce food waste because you open up the vegetable bin and you say, okay, take all these vegetables, put them in the foil, put the chicken, the fish, whatever on top of it, some herbs and spices, blah, 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 and there you go. And you've just cleaned out the refrigerator. You did not throw the food out, and you took perfectly good food that may look a little wilted, but once it gets cooked, what do we care? It looks delicious and reduce food waste. So to me, this is a win-win-win.
And you know what? You could add a little teriyaki. You could add a little Italian salad dressing. You could add a little bit of olive oil and a squeeze of lemon juice. So there's so many ways to kind of moisten it, but then it steams in there and you get the moisture from those veggies. And I think, back in the day, people were doing this in parchment paper. It's a little bit harder to work with. And everybody has aluminum foil at home.
Right.
People don't always have parchment paper. So
no. But parchment paper is like, first of all, how do you spell it? Where are you going to get it? And once you get it in the house, to put it together, it's just, you feel like, where's Julia Child? She works with parchment paper. I don't work with parchment. I work with aluminum foil. Yeah. So, let's call a spade here. So it's just much easier with a foil for the average consumer.
You know what I've not done in a foil packet, but maybe I'll do this sometime, is something with tofu. And I say this because tofu with veggies is sort of a natural, and plant-based eating is another huge trend. It's been going on for a few years. It was a big one you talked about in your story. So what exactly is plant-based eating? Does it mean you have to eat vegan or vegetarian, or does it just mean that you're eating more plants? Like, what is it exactly? We hear the term all the time.
Right. It's funny, Liz, because this term plant-based is not new. I mean, the dietary guidelines going back over a decade talked about plant-based diets, and not that the whole diet had to be all plant-based, such as a vegan diet, but just that more plant-based. In other words, more fruits and more vegetables, more whole grains, and less of protein from animal sources. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You want to make them lean when you have it, but more. I mean, you look at my plate, it's the same thing. My plate is plant-based when you think about it, right? So you got half a plate of fruits and vegetables, about a quarter of it of grains. So when you look at it, that's a plant-based plate. So it's really not a new concept, but it's just picking up speed, and people are repeating it and understanding it finally. And I think a lot of that is due to the My Plate, because it's a visual and I think a lot of registered dietitians and nutritionists kept on saying plant-based, and the science is based on plant-based diets. Heck, we'll go back to the Mediterranean, and the DASH diet. And so I think people now, they've seen the My Plate, they understand the message that more plants on the plate. So plant-based diet makes sense to them. And so I think they're repeating something that we have said all along, and it's based on science. So I think it's fabulous.
So more plants means more fiber. More fiber means more food for all the good bacteria that live in your gut, which is, you're obsessed with food waste. And I think you're probably thinking about all that gut health. If I had to guess, I would say Joan Salge Blake probably thinks about her gut bacteria, maybe not every day. But, when you eat these plant-based foods, you get more food, more fuel for the bacteria. Another trend is fermented foods. Lindsay, who's in the podcast Posse, she thinks that's a big trend and will continue to be a big trend. I just bought some kombucha today at the supermarket. So these are all good things. I feel like 2019 is going to be a healthy year for consumers.
And I think if they get the plant-based up and the whole grains up, I think it's going to be a happy year because less people are going to be constipated.
Oh, maybe you need to do a show on constipation, Joan. Actually, that would be a good show for your college kids.
Do you know that Americans spend millions of dollars each year for laxatives because they're constipated? I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So going back to this plant-based diet and getting some high-fiber grains in your diet, just clean you right out. And when you're constipated, you're grouchy, Liz. I've seen you constipated, and it's ugly.
I've never been constipated, to be perfectly honest. No, I actually never have, Joan, because it's just not who I am, okay? I have literally never, maybe once in my life. But I'm going to save this for a whole nother podcast because I want to end this show not on constipation, but on your family's favorite recipe. You said you're Italian, you love to cook, you love to eat. What is your favorite recipe?
Hands down, without even having to think, pizza. Liz, I love pizza. I make homemade pizza. I make homemade pizza with all these, great vegetables on it. You talk about cleaning out the vegetable bin. And I'm going to tell you, Liz, when you come to my funeral, my sons already know this. They're going to serve pizza because I've already written this down. So when you come to say a few good words about me, you're going to be having pizza.
I don't want to go to your funeral, but thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that, Joan. I feel a special closeness to you now.
You should.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before I let you back to those adorable students at Boston University? But anything else to share before we wrap up our Food Trends 2019 story?
I think it's going to be a good year, Liz. I think it's going to be a good, healthy year. And I think I'm excited the fact that there are something called trends, because that means that people are talking about food, they're talking about health and wellness. I think it'd be great. Of course, I always have to say, make sure that you get your health, nutrition information from credible people. Registered dietitian nutritionists are trained. And so that make sure when you get advice, you're getting it from someone who's been educated on the subject.
And before I let you go, can you just tell my listeners where they can find you on the web?
Sure. So this is going to be very easy. So on Instagram and Twitter, it's Joan Salge Blake. And my podcast, Spot On, you go to Facebook, we'll have its Facebook page. And again, those episodes will be launching soon.
Fantastic. Joan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you to all my listeners. Happy, happy New Year. Let's make it a happy and healthy one. If you love the Liz's Healthy Table podcast, I hope you'll tell a friend or two about it. Post a review wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Stitcher Radio, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Head on over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast for the foil pack recipe I talked about at the top of the show, the recipe roundup that's also on the blog, and the show notes from today's show. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.